Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Redefining the Sophomore Slump During COVID-19. Before we get into today's presentation, we have just a few housekeeping items to run through. Today's presentation will be recorded, and a copy, along with the slides, will be sent out to all registrants at the conclusion of the presentation. Attendees are in listen-only mode. However, if you'd like to chat with us or ask a question, you can do so on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you're on social media, we invite you to connect with us by tweeting @Cognito or using the hashtag CognitoWebinars. Finally, before I turn things over to our incredible panel, I just want to say a few words about Cognito for those unfamiliar with us on the line. Our mission is to combine the science of learning, the art of conversation, and the power of virtual human simulations to measurably improve social, emotional, and physical health. And what does this mean? We empower faculty, students, and staff to take an active role in creating a healthy and safe campus environment for all. Through evidence-based experiential simulations, we offer a personalized and private practice environment for users to develop and practice communication skills aimed at promoting healthy behaviors while reducing harmful ones. Topics covered include mental health and well-being, sexual misconduct prevention, military cultural competency, alcohol and other drugs, and coming soon, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's discussion, Dr. Darren Jones. Dr. Jones serves as the Manager of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at Cognito. Prior to joining Cognito, he served as the Associate Vice President of Student Engagement at Mary Baldwin University. He held roles within student affairs at several universities across various functional areas, including orientation, learning communities, retention programs, student life and activities, fraternity and sorority affairs, intervention services, residence life, housing, academic advising, leadership development programs, community standards, and Title IX. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Darren to introduce today's panel.
All right, thank you so much, Scott, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you all and our amazing panelists to talk about the topic that we have before you. So before we get into the agenda, I would love for the panelists to introduce themselves, the institution that they're representing, and most importantly, what perspective and lens they're bringing to this conversation.
Hi, my name is Melissa Scuderi. I am the Assistant Director of Residential Living at Piedmont University in Demorest, Georgia, which is in Northeast Georgia. I am coming to you guys with definitely a background in residential life, learning communities, Greek advising, as well as an academic advisor.
All right.
Go ahead, Francie. Francie, you can go next.
Oh, Francie.
Hi, everybody. Please forgive me. My camera is not cooperating, but that is me. I promise I look exactly like I do in this photo here. I'm Francie Brown McClure, Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students at Union College, she, her pronouns.
All right, Donald.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Donald Coleman, he, him, his pronouns. I'm Director of Student Transitions at the University of Georgia. I'm coming to you with information about first year experience, second year experience, but also orientation programs.
All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Olga Diaz-Nasser, and I'm a second year at the University of Georgia, majoring in public relations.
And Sammy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sammy Marks. I'm currently a first year at the University of Georgia, and I'm coming to you with the perspective of a first year student during COVID times.
All right, so thank you all so much. So to give you all some context, we're going to provide you with what are we going to talk about today on the next slide. I definitely want to give you all some context on how did we come up with this topic. And we all know that it's been very peculiar and what we say unprecedented times in higher education with the COVID-19, I would like to say COVID-19 era. And with that came a lot of challenges for our students, but also for faculty and staff as well. And I want to bring acknowledgement to that. There is the sophomore slump, and we're going to talk about what that is just so that we all are on the same page with the definition and what the literature says about it. But we knew that there were current class, which Olga represents that current sophomore that entered into the sophomore year and going into the junior year during that time. But then we have Sammy, who is representing a first year student who's came in the thick of it. and was the true COVID-19 freshman class and going into the sophomore year. And so because of that, we knew that there was their opportunity to really discuss what are the opportunities that can exist within that sophomore year, knowing that that is the typical year where support has to be intentionally thought about, because it's not as much in the first year where you have orientation and a lot of strategic initiatives. But then it's not the junior or senior year where students are revving up for graduation and there's a lot of pomp and circumstance around those ceremonious occasions. But what is done for the incoming sophomore class, right? And also with Olga, who represents that sophomore class, who came into it with in the COVID-19, I guess era, if you want to say. She's going to be going into that third year. So what should we be thinking about? What should we be implementing? What are the considerations that we should be thinking about as we design these interventions, these programs, and support moving forward? So we're going to talk about what that is, talk a little bit about the transition theory, and this is a conversation. And so I'm very excited to be just learning about the experiences of Sammy and Olga and our other professionals about these conversations that we're happening on campus, given acknowledgement that everyone is coming to the conversation with a different context, different types of institutions. So what you hear in this conversation may not be directly applicable, but at the same time, there are some gems that I hope you all can take to figure out what conversations should be happening in your respective campuses. We can go to the next slide. All right, so sophomore slump. I want to give a very specific definition so we all coming at it with the ground-based knowledge, which is a period of self-reflection, confusion as students seek to demonstrate academic competence, self-direction, autonomy as setting their pathway towards achieving personal and professional goals. And so I mentioned before, that is that moment where you're not getting the intense support and the red carpet like a first year student would traditionally would. And so what can we think about when it comes down to rolling that red carpet out for our rising sophomore students? And so the effects of COVID-19 really has had an impact on that. And I'm excited to learn about what that impact has been and how will that inform our strategies moving forward. And as we think about that sophomore slump in true student affairs fashion, well, I'll be remiss if I didn't highlight student affairs theory and how we're seeing that the theory to practice is illuminating before our eyes. So when we talk about theory, we have the Salzburg's transition theory, which really is this concept of there's three types of events: anticipated, unanticipated, and non-events. Where we look at students that transition into, through, and out. And there's particular factors that impact the student's ability to cope with that transition, which is the situation, the self, so what is the student bringing to that transition, the support that exists, and what are the strategies that should be thought about. So this is a great example of how we're seeing it come to life and how it provides that framework as we continue to plan for this upcoming year. But what do we do beyond this time once we're all back on campus and enjoying all of the social activities and being together in community again? And so I want to start really with the students. So Sammy and Olga, in our conversation, grief and loss came up. And so I want to start there and get an understanding when it comes down to your experience this year. So Sammy, as a first year student, Olga, as a current sophomore student, tell me about what experiences, that feeling of grief and loss, and how did that manifest in your current experience? You can start with Sammy.
Yeah, of course. So I remember one of the main things that I brought up during our conversation about about grief and loss was that I really didn't gain that connection with a lot of the upperclassmen until later in the second semester, due to us having through some of the organizations I was involved in, we would have meetings online. But of course, it's hard through Zoom to just talk to one individual person, of course, with everybody else being there. So I'd say just that connection with the upperclassmen and really being able to use them as a resource for advice and feeling comfortable with going to them. That's one big thing I lost. And then another thing that I feel like that me and my other classmates have lost would just be some of the traditions here that you usually do as a first year. Like I told you the other day, just last week, I was able to finally ring the chapel bell at UGA. If you know anything about UGA, that's such a big tradition, but it's the fact of the matter that we weren't able to do that until just now. And we've had accomplishments before this, so it's like, I was ringing for all those other accomplishments, but just different things like that.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Go ahead, Olga.
Yeah, kind of jumping off what Sammy said, where it's like you have all of these accomplishments and they're just going unnoticed in a way, and you're kind of letting them go unnoticed, like personally, because at the end of last year, like we missed all of those, because I'm second year now, I missed all of those first year celebrations where you kind of celebrate getting through your first year and everything you've accomplished in your organizations. And now going to those events, even though they're a little different because they're socially distanced, but going to those events and then celebrating the current first years, I realize now how much I've lost. Like the grief hits me now, and missing all of those like first last, like my first last time being in a dining hall, or my first last time seeing my roommate from my college dorm. It's just a lot of like missing small moments that at the time it felt like, oh, I'm not missing that much. I'm not missing my graduation. I'm not missing my prom. But now it kind of hits you. It's like, oh, I really wish I could have had that. And like Sammy said, it's just a lot of tradition. Like you don't get to participate in that as much as you want to.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that point when you mentioned that, because we talked yesterday, and I never thought about those last moments, right? And this is, even when I was talking about the transition theory, moving in, through, and out, is not necessarily moving into college, through college, and out. That year in itself, right? That moving out piece was gone for you. Melissa, I saw you smile and you were agreeing. So would you be able to provide some context or color and your perspective on that, and what resonated with you with what Olga said?
I think about I've done housing for a really long time, and majority of my housing career have been with first years. I choose to live there, and I choose to live next to them. And I think when Olga was talking about that, I miss the move out experience as well, because me as a professional, I receive these students from their parents that didn't have a normal move in, that didn't get the goodbyes or the setting up of the room, and then normal tears that happen that create that family sending that student off to college, especially with my first generation students. But when you go through the year, we didn't get to have that send off of me sitting back and having my last hall meeting and talking and seeing these wonderful men and women who have grown up, who have grown into themselves, who learned to advocate, and to say, wow, you are now ready to be our leader at my institution. And I am so excited for what you're going to learn this summer and be able to apply. But I'm even more excited for your families to welcome you back as this person who you now are. And that is a transition we missed, because it was here one day, gone the next, and there was none of that fanfare that they deserved to receive.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you don't know what you have until it's gone, in a sense. And so the tradition is just, oh, we just do it. It's a thing, but it has extreme value, and I think that is what we're seeing during these times, of how much the experience means to a lot of different folks in different ways, right? So it gets me to think about what will that fall look like to replicate or give that semblance, because that's where institutional loyalty is built, right? It's through those transitions. And so it's important for us not to take those for granted. And I know Donald has mentioned that, they're thinking about how to, create these transitions. And I definitely want to highlight those at the end when we talk about the considerations and what are you all thinking about and wrapping your mind around when it comes down to best practices and developing purpose. Uh, Along with the loss, and I don't want to sit in the space of this is everything that we lost, because we know, and it's important to have that context. But let's talk about what you gained. And the students had such a great narrative on the skills that they gained, and I want them to share what those are. So when it comes down to the skills that you gain because of COVID-19 and having to adjust so quickly and rapidly, tell us a little bit about that. Let's start with Olga.
Okay, I think something that most everyone has gained are some really marketable career skills. I now know how to use a lot of technology that I didn't before. Like I would have never been able to set up this like Zoom meeting or set up a proper like Google Meet or anything like that before, and now I know how to use that technology to my advantage. And also I just learned, I guess, a lot about myself in a way. I learned that I can be more independent than I thought and more adaptable coming into all of these situations where it's no longer the usual meeting space or anything that's was the ordinary sequence of events. And having to work under that time pressure and also think outside of the box because I can no longer just meet up in person with somebody has made me really adaptable and made me realize that I can do a lot more on my own than I thought, which is really, I guess, exciting to discover about yourself. And then just pairing it with those skills, I think sets me up in a good place for the future.
Right. Sammy, do you have anything to add?
Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely want to touch on what Olga said with the marketable skills. Like I've definitely learned how to use way more technology than I wouldn't probably have learned as much if this hadn't happened. But also, I just really learned something that I gained was the value of being more in the moment. And with being more in the moment, all of us here, all students at most universities, we're such driven students. We're always thinking about the future internship, the future job, the future organization, the future position you want. And sometimes you get so caught up in the future that you're not enjoying yourself in the moment. So then let's say something doesn't go our way in the future. We're thinking back to, dang, I wish I would have taken this moment more. So that's something that I feel like I've really gained during this time.
Awesome. Hearing that makes me think, and Donald, please, and Francie, please feel free to chime in. When it comes down to preparing for that second year, right? Olga mentioned these skills that she got because of COVID-19. And so my question would be, now that we're going into, almost like a post-COVID era, how would these skills be garnered when it's not forced because of a external circumstance, right? So how does that information give you a lens on strategic learning objectives and opportunities that should be considered for that sophomore year?
So I'll jump in. So I think one thing that's really important is, for me, it's not necessarily about the tangible skills, but it's this umbrella, if you will, that you're getting at, right? So what I would want students to think about, particularly as they are entering into their sophomore year, is this skill of resiliency and flexibility, right? So there's so much that is important under that umbrella. And as you move into that sophomore year, where this is the time where for people, you're going to be applying for internships, there's so many things that are happening where you've got to learn how to shift and pivot and be nimble. And all of those skills that fall under that are leading to your ability to articulate and exercise flexibility and resilience. If the pandemic has taught us nothing, it is that you cannot prepare for everything, right? You just cannot. And so how do you learn how to pivot? How do you learn how to be flexible, to be nimble, and to go with what is happening? We talk about it at my institution. How do you learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable? And that, for me, is the skills that I would want our sophomores to really think about as they are moving into the sophomore year and the rest of their time at our institutions.
Yeah. Donald, do you have any responses to that? And when it comes down to tangible programs and initiatives that you're thinking about, right? Just hearing what Francie said, what Sammy said, and what Olga is mentioning.
Yeah, I think, one thing we've been doing is really partnering with the academic side to think about what does active learning look like now, right? And so it takes a lot of initiative for students to sign onto a Zoom or to make sure, as opposed to walking into a classroom, and also those relationships with the faculty members. So what we've been hearing a lot is students feel a little closer to some of the faculty because they are in that Zoom situation, as opposed to a first year student who would have been less likely to talk to the faculty member. So teaching students are thinking about how to continue some of those conversations and those relationships, I think is important. I think also as we talk about just leveraging relationships across campus, we've, as faculty and staff, have had to do some different things to get in front of students, such to actually let them know about our resources on campus. And I think this increased some accessibility to resources on campus that I think that we must continue to look at. I think students are going to want to continue to have accessibility to things online or have an option that's more flexible. And so I think that we will continue to have to look at those things as we move forward.
All right, thank you. And, the conversation that I had with you all, we started talking about best practices for sophomore year experience. And I want to touch on those things. And we have in the screen before you to all our attendees, just some notes to guide the conversation. But what you're going to see before you are some larger themes that were considered to be like more of a strategic focus of the sophomore year. So obviously with this lens, we have to think more innovatively about this phase in a collegiate career. So I want to start with restructuring existing resources. And I want to start with you, Francie, as the Vice President of Student Affairs, and you're overseeing multiple functional areas. And if you can mention those functional areas, that would be really, really great to provide everybody with context. But I want to know your thoughts on, restructuring existing resources. What do those conversations look like? What have you had to reprioritize, put lower on a prioritization, raise higher? And how does that translate to what you're thinking about for the sophomore year?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So at my institution, I have responsibility for our health center, for our counseling center, for campus safety, athletics, our career center, dining, student activities, fraternity and sorority life, accommodative services, our class deans, our first year experience, and our community engagement office as well. So almost everything that is not happening in the classroom falls under student affairs at our institution. And so, as we think about restructuring, as we think about, what we're doing with our existing resources, for me, this first bullet of meeting students where they are is critically important. Part of that is because higher education was not set up to meet students where they are. It was set up for, here's what you need in order to do the jobs that we believe you need to do. And so follow this path. Even when you look at an academic program, we are telling students, here are the classes you need to take in order to graduate, not what is it that you were trying to do and how can we really think about creating and building around you. So as we start to think about our sophomores and their experience, how are we starting to potentially tailor what we are doing to what they need, right? So we believe in your sophomore year, here are the things that you should be exploring, here are the things that you should be doing. How do we shift that and start to say, based on what you've been through right now, based on what you want to do, what are the things that you believe are going to be impactful and helpful to you? And how do we then start to build that around the student, as opposed to you come to us and we're going to tell you what you need to be successful? We are having a conversation with them and building around their needs. We're currently restructuring a residential curriculum right now that is really and truly about these kind of life skills, this, emotional intelligence, which is, my area of interest in what my, research is about, right? So how are we really emphasizing this EQ and emotional intelligence in what we're doing, in particular with all of our students? But again, that sophomore year is so critical because people at times forget the sophomores, right? First, people get excited about the first years. It's like, woo, first years. Seniors are graduating, right? Juniors have their stuff going on and the sophomores get lost. And so how do we continue to bring them in and engage them? And again, that looks different in every area of my portfolio, but it is about having conversations, intentional conversations with students to say, what is it that is helpful to you, as opposed to us saying, here's what we think is going to be helpful and beneficial for you. One last thing, and I will stop, is that, the pandemic has also given us an opportunity to think about issues of race, issues of justice in very different kinds of ways. And so again, we have to think about our resources and what we are doing and who those resources and those systems are benefiting, right? Whether it is a benefit that is acknowledged or one that is not acknowledged, we have an opportunity and an obligation as administrators to take a really hard, fast look at who we are serving and who we are not serving, to think about who is coming to the table and who does not have a voice to come to the table, to make sure that we are meeting their needs. And what we're seeing, and it's important again for these students who've, you know, had a really kind of shaken up year, is that some of those folks are not necessarily going to be able to articulate those things. And so how do we make sure that we are advocating for them in a different kind of way than we've had to think about before?
Thank you. That was a lot. And Francie is not holding any punches. That's why I was excited to that's why I had to direct the question to her. The second piece I want to touch on, you know, I have cataloging resources via associations. Sorry. And Melissa, I want to direct this to you because you mentioned about, you know, learning what's out there. What are people doing? So if you can touch a little bit about what can institutions be doing when it comes down to these resources that are out there.
I think the first thing is we have to be assessment focused, and we have to be able to not only get information from our students, but be able to communicate the student experience. The student experience is just not academics. It is that 360, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365. And so for in the residence life purview, something that our local, our regional, and our national association is doing. So that would be a QOI for housing. We in the South, and so I'm in the Southeast Association, is we are getting information from our partners and our stakeholders about how their first years are doing retention wise. How are their grades doing? How has their residential experience impacted them in a positive or negative manner? How has the experience impacted the resident life assistants, because they have had to take on so much more with COVID and COVID protections and cleaning. In addition, we're also looking at our field. How can our field be more intentional with our students? So when faculty gets to go home or staff goes home, there are people like me who live there all the time with those students, and we want to be able to meet them where they are, but rely on this package of knowledge. So in my committee that I'm on within CHO is we're all about creating that data bank for our housing professionals so that they can dig in and say, hey, this is what's happening. I also want to leave that data behind. So if Sammy or Olga go into my field, that they can look back and they can connect because they were a student during that time. Just like we have research from the 9/11, when I was in college, I can look back to that time historically in my profession and see what we were doing and what we changed. The pandemic has taught me that we need data to be able to lead change. And so with that, if I can leave that behind and other associations can do that as well, we will have a better way to communicate that. I also think that communication is going to translate into administrators understanding money that we need to provide students resources, and also being able parents to join in that family package of joining a university. You know, Sammy's family is, you know, he went to Georgia, but everybody in his family now goes to Georgia. And so that's really important to remember with our first generation students, is that we have to be able to break it down where everyone can understand what the student experience is. And hopefully we are able to do that and keep that as a record.
Yeah, thank you. Let's move on down to the academic initiatives, which is tied to developing purpose as well. So we made it maybe a blended. Donald, we were talking about the academic initiatives, and Melissa, I believe you mentioned the studying processes and techniques. Donald, you focus on transition programs, you know, and have a strong background in orientation. Tell me a little bit about what does a transition program look like for this second year? And there's the idea of FYE, and a lot of institutions have sophomore year experiences. What is going to be different about this year particularly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that current conversations we've been having is, so I think there's this push and rush to get back to normal, but what is normal now? And I think that, you know, I think Dr. Brian McClure mentioned it earlier of who's at the table having these conversations. So for us, as we think about the whole experience of the student, we have people at the table from the academic side, the co-curricular side, every side to really be thinking about what the student experience is going to look like. And so we know that we've offered different things this year in terms of peer mentorship has gone, online. Opportunities for tutoring have been online, and in the past they've always been more in person. So how do we continue to allow those flexible opportunities for students? I think as we think about the programming for first year and second year experiences, like Dr. Brown McClure mentioned, we have to blow some things up and start over. We have to talk to our students and figure out what has their experience been. If we've been doing first year programs for a while and we know what the research says, but we haven't had students who might have been, in these predicaments for a while. And so like we were talking about admissions, some of our mission reps and thinking about how some students, depending on where they went to high school at, our incoming students may have been online Zoom for 2 years, if they haven't gone back into the classroom. Some districts and some counties haven't. And so how are we working with those students? And so thinking about our demographics and knowing that just because we normally get a typical demographic that we can describe our students with, it may look a little different now. So what questions are we asking during our first year surveys or during orientation to see who is actually coming into our university? How long have they been in person? Or what experiences do they need to really be successful? And I think that as we had to pivot last year, I think we're gonna have to think about how we create new things and how we come up with new ways to support our students.
Right. Well, if you all didn't notice, Sammy and Olga are the students at UGA, and Donald is a professional staff at UGA. So I'm going to leverage that connection with my next question. So Olga and Sammy, you heard Donald say we have to have conversations. There are some questions we have to ask. We need to know what to offer. We're blowing everything up. So take that as the sign that you right here in this moment have the ability to tell Donald, what do you want to see happen? And everybody's going to benefit from this information, but knowing that that is what, he's making that recommendation, right? So let's think about for a second, and I want you to share just your initial reactions when the question is asked, what should we know? When it comes down to Sammy, you going into your second year, what do you need? What support do you need to be successful in that second year? Then Olga, what did not exist, but also you needed to have a successful transition into your junior year. So, and what I want to highlight on that, even though the focus is on the sophomore slump with those that are coming in, you were a sophomore during this time, and now you're going into your third year. So a lot of what we can hear or take from this conversation can be woven into a creation of a refined first year experience, but also what does the junior year experience look like as well? So I'm gonna go back to the question, what do you want? What should professional staff, faculty, supporters should know about what you need for the next year, for that sophomore year? Anyway, Sammy, you can start.
Yeah, I was so actually that's something that we've already been talking about through our organizations to the professional staff. And one thing is something that Donald's already been working on, which is allowing us to recreate our G-Day pictures. So traditionally as a freshman, I think during the first week of school, the RAs take all the first years down to Sanford Stadium, and you get to actually go inside the stadium and you take a big G picture. And that's something that we haven't been able to do this year. And of course, a lot of students are like, I still want to do it. I still want to do it. So after, I guess, somebody finally communicated with the Department of Student Transitions, we've been able to work with that a little bit. Of course, there are some challenges because not everybody will be living on campus. A lot of people, once they get into their sophomore year, live off campus. So that's going to be something tricky to figure out. But I can definitely tell they're working hard on it. But then something second that I honestly would like to see that me and my friends have talked about a little bit, I don't know how much other people have heard about it, was that usually as a freshman, and Georgia's football school, let me remind you. So usually as a freshman, you get priority to like the season tickets and everything. Like you're basically almost guaranteed one as long as you pay the money. As a sophomore, you don't get priority because the freshmen and the seniors have priority. And then I think it even goes to the juniors, if I'm not mistaken, or the juniors and the sophomores are on the same level within that. So I don't know if that would be within your realm to talk to somebody about. But It definitely do that.
I love Sammy had a specific request. That's what I asked, right? He had a specific request. I love it. Okay.
Yeah, I want to jump off literally what Sammy left off on, which is, I mean, not specifically football, but what he mentioned was that sophomores kind of get thrown to like the bottom tier so often. And a lot of my friends mentioned that we're like, oh, we don't get priority for anything. Like, we don't get priority for that. We don't get priority for parking. You know, it kind of feels like people just forget we exist sometimes. And
Mm,
it's hard because a lot of us are going through a lot of changes. Like, we're either just getting into our major or we're changing around everything. We're trying to find internships, but we also don't have enough experience for internships. It feels like we're just in this middle space where nothing really seems to be going our way. And I think it's just important for staff to kind of see what they can do to, I mean, not necessarily make us feel special, but I guess extend more of a hand, more of support,
mm,
because
yeah.
I think something we mentioned in our conversation when we spoke about this was that, you know, during this time, a lot of sophomores either change their major or rethink what they're doing in life. And sometimes you just need someone to like help you out a little bit, give you a little bit of support as you're kind of rethinking your entire life path. So just being very intentional about reaching out to sophomores and giving them programs that help support them through that time of self-reflection and questioning. Um,
Uh,
Even just transitioning into the junior year, like I feel like a lot of my friends and even I, like we still have a lot of questions that we just don't really know who to turn to for that.
Mm, love that. And that is a perfect segue into the developing purpose. You know, you all mentioned campus traditions. And what I'm taking from what you both have said is what is that moment? What do we have for us? You know, right? Because we talked about freshmen have orientation. Junior year, you talked about internships. They're the prime time, you know, at the prime rib, right? And then you got the seniors who are preparing for that graduation. What traditions can exist or can come out of this time, right, that is sophomore specific, that shows you that value in that year where you feel as though we don't matter, you know, right? So I love what you, and you don't have to apologize for, you know, like make us feel special. No, we want we want to do that. I think everyone should feel valued and validated throughout their entire experience. So I love what you mentioned with the campus traditions. And then we have this aspect on intentional conversations, you know, right? And Melissa and Francie, Dr. Brown McClure, you're there. What does intentional conversations look like now? What conversations should staff and faculty be prepared to have, right? And that can be academically purpose, you know, driven, but also in the care realm as well, because we know that students are coming back to us with trauma, you know, right? So what are your strategies, your thoughts, the considerations about those intentional conversations?
I can talk from kind of what Piedmont is doing in this situation. We use a database system called Starfish, and that is kind of the student affairs way to talk to academics. Everybody is inside of that, and so we can raise flags on students saying they have an internet concern because they can't do Zoom at home, right? They have a concern that they could have been exposed to COVID. They can have family financial issues, and so we're able to raise students and us are able to raise these flags and then create intentional connections that are in person or in a safe manner electronically to provide a direct resource. So no longer would like Olga have to go to 14 different offices. She goes to one platform, raises a flag, multiple people get alerted to that platform, and then we can handle that with a student and family. And that leads to these intentional conversations that go beyond, right, the immediate need. But how can we serve her? How can we serve her? It could be affecting her roommates. And how can we also serve the classroom? And we as student affairs professionals can say, hey, academics, I know Olga needs this. How can I help her reach her potential? I need you to set up a meeting with resources. I need us to get somebody to help her fix her internet at home, or what can you do? And we've done that. Now we are much smaller than Georgia, but we've done that. I think the other transition is how students can have conversations with students as a peer-to-peer mentor, but how we as adults, and I say adult because I'm older, but to put it in a perspective of making sure that I'm asking how you really are doing, not how you're preparing yourself on social media, what you really need. Is that anything from a hug to groceries? And how can I get you to be successful in your space? Which could mean I change your housing. We provide different deadlines. We provide different support, medical, etc., so that you can be the best student you can be. Before the pandemic, we kind of asked that. Now in the pandemic, we are asking that every day.
Thank you.
I think for me, it is, I agree with everything that Melissa said. I think to take it kind of back a step, it's that we as professionals have to acknowledge and realize that all students are not created equal. They are not the same. And oftentimes we kind of treat them the same or lump them all together. And that's not helpful, right? Each student is coming with their unique experience and their identity, and we need to see them for that and ask those good questions to understand what can work for their experience. We also, and I am solely now talking to administrators and practitioners on this call, we have to stop getting in this space of being, having our own baggage and damage from being burned by a student and placing that onto another student, right? So there are situations that will happen where we have given our all to a student and that student has made a choice. Hear me again, that student made a choice not to take advantage of those resources. And so now we feel like, why am I giving that to any other student? Don't do that, right? Like, you have to understand there is choice in every situation and treat each and every student the way they need to be treated. And if you can't do that, you might need to think about, am I in the right field, right? Because we have to show up every day with empathy, with wisdom, right? With courage, and give those students our best. We also need to extend that grace to our colleagues, right? And have intentional conversations with our colleagues, because in the same way with our students, we don't know what our colleagues are going through, right? And then for ourselves, we need to be able to say, you know what? I'm not in a space right now where I can give what I need to give to these students. So let me take a personal day, right? And we need to model that for people, because we get so caught up in, I've got to be here, I've got to do this, I need to respond to this email, I need to do all of these things, that we neglect ourselves in that process. Do not ask anything of your students that you are not willing to do yourself, right? And so make sure in that we are having those conversations with each other, with ourselves, and with our students.
And I'm going to echo back to that. There is nothing more important now than taking care of ourselves, because if we can't take care of ourselves, our physical body is not doing well, which can make us more susceptible from stress and anxiety to being sicker. And I look at it in this perspective. One of our counselors here said, if you can't take care of your body and your emotional health, your body's going to be sicker, and I do not want to give COVID an additional chance to get you. And that stuck to me, because how many people learn if I work longer, that it looks better. If I'm up at 2 a.m. answering emails, I'm doing better. That's not doing better. That's not role modeling work-life harmony, balance, or anything. And I'm not a millennial, but take the time off. Take your vacation. If I'm not well, I can't be well for my students, but I also can't be well for my family, my friends, my brothers and sisters that are all important to me. And I have to tell them that. I sometimes have to make my students, I don't know, Sammy and Olga, if you feel this, if people keep you accountable, I'm like, y'all go take a nap. Y'all go get something to eat, because you've forgotten that part. But we need to do that too.
Yeah, thank you. We can go to the next category, Scott. And I want to transition into that, because with the intentional conversations, and I appreciate Melissa and Francie for that. And I also want to add, with the intentional conversations and these questions, right, that a lot of, I would say a strategy is a set of questions, right, intentional questions to ask the students to get information and data. And a question I will put out there when we do that, and as you shape what do those conversations look like, are you prepared for the answers and the information that you will receive? And so I want to challenge everybody, any participant that is thinking about, intentional conversation strategies. These are the questions we want to know. Are we asking it just for a bullet point, or are we asking it for actionable, to support actionable items, right? Because what we may find is that the information that we get in these conversations, everyone may not be equipped to provide an answer or to support in a particular way. So how do we prepare each other for those conversations? How are we informing on what we're hearing so that it's almost like that cycle of assessment? We're hearing this, all right, this is the support that we can provide. Let's share that with the community and our colleagues so that we know when this comes up again, we are prepared to provide support in that moment, right? So I want to challenge folks to really think about that aspect. With these conversations, are we prepared for everything that's going to come? Now, granted, there's a spectrum on challenges and what people are experiencing, right? But I really want to challenge folks to think about that. We have student leadership involvement and mentoring, and then on-campus programs and conduct. So when it comes down to leadership, I'm gonna pass it on to Olga and Sammy. When it comes down to this next year and the experiences that you lost, what should institutions be thinking about with leadership experiences, with student involvement as they open up completely this upcoming fall?
I can start. I think something I found interesting was that during the pandemic, I was actually able to get involved in a few more organizations just because, I mean, Zoom made it a lot easier to like go to meetings rather than having to force myself out of bed and in person. But even though I was now involved in these organizations, I miss that social aspect of actually getting to meet other members and other people. And personally, I was really shy during my first year. And so missing that social aspect of my second year is really hard because now I feel like I'm 2 years behind in making all those connections. I feel like going forward, I guess it's placing more of an emphasis on letting people in organizations connect with each other, giving them the time to have those free conversations to form relationships that they may not be able to form inside the classroom, where it's a lot harder to, I guess, turn away from a lecture and speak with someone rather than in a club or an organization like that. So I think it's just, I mean, really focusing on that social aspect that we're all missing right now.
Yeah. Sammy, do you have anything to add?
Oh yeah, definitely. So this year I've still been able to get involved really well. Like I'm a first year senator, dog camp counselor, different things like that. But when talking to a lot of my friends, they've been a little scared of getting involved because they just, number one, classes are already all online, so you're doing all your Zoom online, and then with the organizations being on Zoom, that's online too. And it's kind of like after you're done with your classes and maybe one meeting for one organization, you're already zoomed out at the end of the day. So I feel like going into the sophomore year, a lot of my friends, they feel they don't have a lot of the leadership positions that they should have had going into that year. So I would say that something that an administrator should maybe keep in mind is that even though a student doesn't have certain leadership positions or previous experience within college, if they seem willing to get to that point, if they seem willing, like they have it, they just need somebody to give them the opportunity, to give them the opportunity, because a lot of these students, there's a lot of great students out here. I have a lot of great friends. They just haven't had the opportunity to they just don't have the position to actually go out and be in that organization.
Right. What resonates with me, and Francie, I'm gonna bring you back to the stage because you mentioned a reorientation, and I thought that was a very interesting concept. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like for you all? What are the conversations? What are being integrated into it on your campus?
Yep, absolutely. So for us, we allowed students an opportunity to be in person or to be remote, and a significant amount of them chose to be in person. However, we could not bring students together to do things in the way that we normally would have for orientation, simply because of the COVID restrictions that were happening. along with that, this year has just been drastically different from other years. And so there wasn't a real opportunity to orient and ground yourself in what it means for our students to be a Union College student. And so we are having conversations now about how we are going to put together reorientation for our sophomores. And so it's not the, let's do the kind of fun get to know you pieces, because those have happened organically over time. But it's thinking about what are these kind of skills, what's the information, what are the values that we want to make sure that we are having conversations with our students about, to again help them situate themselves in our community and understand what it means to be a member of our community, and not a member of our community that under an extreme amount of kind of pressure, if you will, or constant flux and change, because change is normal, but the change that has existed in COVID is not, right? And so what does it mean to be part of this community and to understand the norms, the ebbs and the flows, our expectation? Under normal circumstances, we're not saying to you, don't do this or don't do that or don't breathe near people, don't hang, right? That's not happening. So how do we, again, reorient their minds to help them understand what does it mean to be a part of this community? And it's not just a one and done. So we'll do some things at the beginning of next year, but really being intentional throughout the entire year with helping them understand, hey, you might not have done this in this way last year, but let me help you understand this is what this means. When you see the first year students doing this, this is what that means. And here's how that's going to happen for you all.
Right. Thank you. The last section we had before we move to, questions, is on-campus programs and conduct. I made the joke, now that we are going into the fall, I can see, that full experience that students did not get that last year. They're going to come expecting a full on-campus experience, and whatever, is different per institution. I understand. So Olga actually is a part of like a form of a judicial board at UGA, right? And then Melissa works in residence life. So I would love to know, what should people be thinking about now when it comes down to addressing basic needs, right? Because we talked about understanding what those are and also anticipating behaviors for the fall. So I'm gonna start with Melissa, and then Olga, I want you to chime in on this is what I see coming down.
So what I definitely see it coming is that I do think that my departments across the nation are preparing for an uptick in conduct, because we're going to be able to allow students to be more in social gathering spaces together, which could lead to parties, traditional things that happen within the institutions and organizations, and could possibly be involved with rule breaking. To be frankly, I work with freshmen. I know we normally have in a time period, you'll have your traditional conduct cases, people trying alcohol for the time, people staying up late and getting guest violations, those kind of typical things that you usually see when you enter freedom. I'm prepared to handle that with a higher influx, as well as a kind of more real talk, real transparency to have those conversations with my freshmen.
Yeah. Olga, from your lens, I mean, you're a student, but also you're part of the accountability group. Tell me your perspective.
So for those who don't know, I'm an advisor advocate at UGA's University Judiciary, where we are a student organization that helps hold the formal conduct hearings when students are alleged to have violated the code of conduct. So we kind of talk about it in our organization right now as well, because we've had less code of conduct cases this whole year. And we make the joke as well, people aren't violating the code of conduct as much, but in reality, I guess we know that's kind of not true. It just seems, those violations, I guess, are in fewer numbers because of, the way people are living right now, the way the pandemic is affecting us all. And I agree with y'all. I think now people are going to come back in full force. We're going to be in person. Dorms are not going to be as limited capacity. People can have guests. And I think it's just going to be really important to kind of, I guess, give students who, especially the incoming freshmen who have probably been on Zoom for 2 years now, who are, craving that social interaction, giving them an outlet that's maybe more safe and not the usual outlets
Yeah.
where we're talking about, like Melissa mentioned, where they're trying alcohol for the first time, they're doing these things that are not necessarily the best options for them, rather giving them a safer outlet where they can still have that social interaction that they're desperately craving while not necessarily attaching themselves to these negative behaviors.
Right.
And I
Thank
think,
you.
oh, I'm sorry, Darren. I was
No,
going to
go ahead.
say,
Go ahead.
I feel like what Olga says is that in that we as student affairs professionals and people in these spots that can make these events happen and coordinate, we miss that social normal too. We miss the way our campuses buzz and feel and the excitement and all of that. We have to open spaces so the students have safe places to go and things to do. And that's us getting back to normal. And I think that's where we have to have really intentional conversations saying, we want to do this because this is what the students are asking for. So we prevent conduct issues. We prevent those things because we don't want our students to have to go through that, but we're here to partner with them if they do. But also we now have this layer of context that we're not through the pandemic yet. We still
Right.
have to be safe, but we can be conscious now.
Yeah. And I want everyone to really think about, the education that is going to be. We all have compliance requirements and everything. And when we talk about conduct, of course, we're going to think about alcohol use, and we're going to think about, particular violations. And now I think we should really be prepared. What does bystander intervention training look like, right? And being, equipping students and the community to be able to have those conversations and be able to exhibit those behaviors, or what we like to call cognito protective behaviors, and really emphasizing that culture of care and how it's everybody's responsibility. So as we are anticipating an uptick, what are we doing to prevent that? And when we say prevent that, mitigate, minimize, because we all know it's going to happen. I don't think there's one institution that's like, we have 0 cases or 0 activity in this area. So how are we thinking innovatively on this? How are we using what we've learned during the pandemic when it comes down to learning delivery modalities, right? So that people are engaged in these type of lessons and conversations, because even more so now than ever, those protective factors are going to be very, very important in a number of different ways. So I just wanted to add that. We have 1 minute left, and I want to open it up to Q&A in this last minute. Does anybody have 1 or 2 questions? Feel free to submit it. I'll wait a second, but as we wait on something, I want to thank my wonderful panelists. And Francie, even though we can't see you, we still feel your spirit, and we felt it when you was talking. But thank you all so much. We greatly appreciate sharing your experiences, and I hope that our attendees was able to take something away from our conversation and continue their conversations on their respective campuses. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar. All right, thank you all. Anything else, Scott? You want to close out, or?
Nope, that's it. Thanks everyone on the line, and have a great afternoon.
All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.